Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt the cold hit him like a wall. The wind on Kepler 442b was so strong it nearly knocked him over. Snow flew everywhere, stinging his face and making his eyes water. He pulled his wool hat down over his ears and zipped up his jacket. All around him, other beings were getting off their ships too. But these were not humans. These were aliens from different worlds across the galaxy. Jake had never seen most of these creatures before, and they looked just as strange to him as he probably looked to them. A tall blue alien with 4 arms walked past him. Its skin looked like it was made of smooth stone, and it had big black eyes that seemed to look right through Jake. Another creature that looked like a giant bug with metal parts attached to its body clicked and buzzed as it moved. There was also a being that seemed to be made of living crystal, sparkling and changing colors as it walked. Jake counted 12 different types of aliens in total. Each one looked more advanced and powerful than the last. Some of them had machines floating around them. Others had suits that glowed with their own light. A few had robots following them around carrying equipment. Then there was Jake. He wore a simple brown jacket, blue jeans, and work boots. On his back was an old canvas backpack that his father had used when he went camping. In his pocket was a basic knife that his grandfather had given him years ago. That was it. No fancy machines, no glowing suits, no robots, a voice boomed across the landing area. Jake looked up to see the biggest alien he had ever seen. It stood at least 10 feet tall and had skin that looked like glass. You could see right through it to the organs inside. It had 4 arms, each one as thick as Jake's whole body. When it spoke, its voice came from speakers placed around the area. "Welcome to the Galactic Survival Test," the giant alien said. Overseer Clix9, you are here because your species wants to join the Emergency Response Coalition. But first, you must prove that your people can survive in the worst conditions. Jake looked around at the other contestants. They all seemed so confident, so ready. Their technology hummed and beeped around them. Some of them were already putting on special suits that looked like they cost more than Jake's entire house back. On Earth, the rules are simple, Overseer Clix9 continued. You have 72 hours to survive on this moon. The temperature here is -60 degrees. The wind can reach speeds of over 100 miles per hour. There is no food, no water, and no shelter except what you can make or bring. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. -60 degrees was colder than anywhere he had ever been. But he had grown up in Alaska, and his grandfather had taught him how to survive in cold weather. He hoped that would be enough. The being who survives the longest and in the best condition will earn their species a place in the coalition, the overseer said. This is not just about staying alive. This is about proving that your people can handle any emergency situation. One of the aliens, the blue one with 4 arms, stepped forward. Overseer, where should we set up our survival stations? Anywhere you choose, Clix9 replied. This entire area is your test zone. You may begin now. Immediately, the alien sprang into action. The blue one pressed a button on its belt, and a large metal box appeared out of thin air. The box unfolded itself into what looked like a small building, complete with windows and a door that glowed with heat. The bug-like alien opened up its metal parts, and they began to grow and change shape. Within minutes, it had built itself a shelter that looked like a high-tech cave. Warm air was already flowing out of vents in the walls. The crystal being did something even more amazing. It raised its arms, and energy began to flow around it like a warm bubble. The snow that touched this bubble melted instantly. Inside the bubble, the temperature looked comfortable and safe. Jake watched all of this with growing amazement. These aliens had technology that seemed like magic to him. How could he possibly compete with that? The blue alien who had introduced itself as Velcorum walked over to Jake. Its translator device made its voice sound mechanical and cold. Human, I do not see your survival equipment. Where is your shelter? Where is your heating system? Jake patted his backpack. Right here. Velcorum's big black eyes seemed to get even bigger. In that small bag? Impossible. No one can survive these conditions without proper technology. We'll see about that, Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The crystal being, who called itself Zithral, came over to join the conversation. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes. Human Jake, we have studied your species. You come from a warm planet. Your people have only basic technology. How do you expect to survive where we might struggle even with our advanced systems? Jake thought about his grandfather, who had lived in Alaska his whole life. He thought about the stories the old man had told him about surviving in the wilderness with nothing but what nature provided. My grandfather always said that the best technology is the kind that never breaks down. The aliens looked at each other. Jake could tell they thought he was crazy. The bug-like alien, whose name was Shiktar, clicked and buzzed. Its translator made the sounds into words. Human, we respect your courage, but courage alone will not keep you warm when the temperature drops even further tonight. Maybe not, Jake said, but I've got a few tricks my grandfather taught me. The overseer's voice boomed again. All contestants, you now have 67 hours and 32 minutes remaining. I suggest you begin your survival preparations immediately. Jake watched as the aliens went back to their shelters. Some of them were still setting up more equipment. He could see heaters, food makers, water purifiers, and communication devices. They had everything they could possibly need, all powered by energy sources that Jake did not understand. He walked away from the group and found a spot about 50 yards away where the snow was deep and the wind was not quite as strong. He took off his backpack and set it down. Then he knelt in the snow and began to look around. The snow here was not like the snow back home. It was harder, more packed together. That was good. It meant it would be stronger when he started building. He pulled out his knife and began to test the snow, cutting small pieces to see how they held together. Behind him, he could hear the aliens talking about him. Their translator devices made their voices carry on the wind. The human will not last. The first night, said Velcorum. It is unfortunate, added Zithral. But perhaps his failure will teach the galaxy that technology cannot be replaced by primitive methods. Shiktar's clicking sounded like laughter. We should prepare to call for medical assistance. The human will need help when he begins to freeze. Jake smiled to himself as he continued to work. Let them think what they wanted. He had something that all their technology could not give them. He had knowledge passed down through generations of humans who had learned to survive in the cold using nothing but their hands and their brains. The wind picked up, and the snow began to fall harder. Jake looked up at the dark sky and felt the cold bite at his face. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds, was the sun that would rise tomorrow. And when it did, he would be ready for it. He had work to do. Jake began his work as the sun disappeared behind the thick clouds. The temperature was dropping fast, and he could feel the cold trying to get through his clothes, but he had a plan. His grandfather had taught him this technique when he was just a boy, and now it might save his life. He started by drawing a circle in the snow with his boot. The circle was about 10 feet across, just big enough for him to lie down inside with room to move around. Then he began cutting blocks of snow. With his knife, the knife was not fancy. It was just a simple steel blade with a wooden handle. But it was sharp, and more importantly, it was strong. Jake had used it to cut wood, clean fish, and do 100 other jobs around his home in Alaska. Now he was using it to cut building blocks out of frozen water. Each block was about the size of a brick. Jake cut them carefully, making sure they were all the same size and shape. The snow here was perfect for this kind of work. It was old snow, packed down hard by the wind and cold. When he cut it, it held together like soft stone. While Jake worked, the aliens were finishing their own shelters. He could hear their machines humming and beeping as they set up their high-tech equipment. Warm light glowed from their shelters, and he could see them moving around inside, already comfortable and safe. Vel, Corum, the blue alien with 4 arms, came over to watch Jake work. Human, what are you doing? You are wasting energy that you will need to stay warm. Jake looked up from his cutting. I'm building a house. A house? From snow? Velkorum's translator made a sound that might have been laughter. Snow is frozen. Water. It cannot keep you warm, it will only make you colder. That's what most people think, Jake said, lifting another block and setting it in place. But my grandfather taught me different. He learned it from the Inuit people. They've been building these houses for thousands of years. Velkorum watched as Jake placed the first row of blocks around his circle. Each block fit tightly against the next one, with no gaps between them. Even if this structure provides some protection from the wind, it cannot generate heat. You will freeze inside it, Jake smiled. We'll see. The crystal being Zithral floated over to join the conversation. Its energy bubble kept the snow from even touching it. Human Jake, we have scanned your construction. The ice blocks you are the same temperature as the air around us? How can something that cold possibly make you warm? It's not about making heat, Jake explained as he started the second row of blocks. It's about keeping heat. My body makes heat all the time. The trick is not letting that heat escape. Shiktar, the bug-like alien, clicked and buzzed as it approached. Your body heat is not sufficient for these temperatures. Our calculations show that you will lose heat faster than you can produce it. Jake continued working, placing each block with care. The second row was slightly smaller than the first, and he tilted each block inward just a little bit. This was the tricky part. If he got the angle wrong, the whole structure would collapse. Your calculations don't account for everything, Jake said. You're thinking like machines. But humans have been surviving in cold places long before we had any machines to help us. More aliens came to watch as Jake worked. They stood in a circle around him, their warm shelters behind them, their advanced technology keeping them comfortable. To them, Jake must have looked like a primitive creature, playing with snow while the temperature dropped toward deadly levels. But Jake knew what he was doing. Each row of blocks was smaller than the last, creating a spiral that curved inward. The walls were getting higher and the shape was becoming clear. He was building a dome, but not just any dome. He was building it the way his grandfather had taught him, the way the Inuit had perfected over centuries. By the time he had finished the fourth row, the structure was already starting to lean inward. The blocks supported each other, each one held in place by the ones around it. No mortar, no glue, no technology, just the right shape and the right fit. This is impossible, said another alien that Jake had not met before. This one looked like a walking tree, with bark for skin and leaves that glowed with their own light. The structure should collapse under its own weight. Physics is the same everywhere, Jake said, working on the fifth row. If you build something the right way, it will hold itself up. The aliens began talking among themselves in their own languages. Their translator devices were working overtime, trying to keep up with all the different conversations. Jake could hear words like primitive, impossible, and illogical being repeated over and over. As Jake worked on the sixth row, he noticed that the blocks were getting warm where his hands touched them. The heat from his body was starting to melt the surface of the snow just slightly. When he placed each block, this thin layer of melted snow would freeze again, creating a seal between the blocks. Look, said Velkorum, pointing at the places where Jake's hands had been. The human's body heat is melting the construction material. This proves that the structure cannot insulate him properly. But Jake knew better. This melting and refreezing was exactly what he wanted. It was creating an airtight seal that would keep the warm air inside and the cold air outside. The igloo was becoming stronger with every block he placed. The seventh row was even smaller, and now the dome shape was obvious. Jake had to reach up to place the blocks, and he had to work from inside the structure. The walls were closing in around him, creating a small space that was already feeling less windy. Human, called Zithral from outside, we are concerned. For your safety, the opening at the top is getting smaller. How will you escape if you need help? I'll leave a door, Jake called back. Right now I'm working on the roof. The eighth row was the hardest. Jake had to be very careful about the angle of each block. Too steep and they would fall inward. Too shallow and they would fall outward. He had to feel his way, trusting the knowledge that his grandfather had passed down to him. By the time he placed the ninth row, Jake was working in almost complete darkness. The opening at the top was only about 2 feet across now. He could hear the aliens outside, their voices, sounding worried. "The human has trapped himself," said Shiktar. "We should intervene before he suffocates." "No," said another voice. Jake thought it might be the overseer. "The human knew what he was doing when he began. We will not interfere unless he asks." "For help?" Jake smiled in the darkness. He was not trapped, and he was not in danger. He was almost finished. The 10th row needed only 3 blocks, then 2 blocks for the 11th row, and finally 1 block for the very top dot when he placed the last block, the keystone that held the entire dome together. Jake felt a surge of pride. He had done it. He had built a shelter using nothing but snow, his knife, and the knowledge his grandfather had given him, but he was not finished yet. Now came the most important part. Jake began to cut a doorway in the wall, low and small, just big enough for him to crawl through. The door had to be lower than the main floor of the igloo so that cold air would sink down and out while warm air would rise and stay inside. When the door was finished, Jake crawled outside to look at his work. The igloo stood complete, a perfect dome of snow blocks that looked like it had been carved by an artist. The aliens stared at it in silence. "It's beautiful," whispered Zithral. "But will it work?" asked VL-KO. Jake crawled back inside his new home and began the final steps. He used his knife to smooth the inside walls, and as he worked, his body heat began to warm the small space. The surface of the walls started to glaze over, creating a thin layer of ice that would seal in the warm air outside. The temperature was dropping toward -70 degrees. Inside the igloo, it was still cold, but Jake could already feel the difference. The wind was gone, the biting cold was gone. He was in a small bubble of still air that was slowly getting warmer. Jake lay down on his backpack and pulled his jacket tight around him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he would sleep warm and safe in a house made of snow. Jake woke up to the sound of howling wind outside his igloo. But inside, everything was quiet and still. He opened his eyes and could not believe what he felt. It was warm. Not hot, but warm enough that he was not shivering anymore. He sat up and looked around his small snow house. The walls were covered with a thin layer of ice that sparkled in the dim light coming through the snow blocks. His breath was no longer making clouds in the air. The temperature inside the igloo was just above freezing, while outside it was probably much colder. Jake smiled and thought about his grandfather. The old man had been right. He had always said that the best shelter was one that worked with nature, not against it. The igloo was not fighting the cold. It was using the cold to make itself stronger. Outside, Jake could hear the aliens talking. Their voices sounded worried and tired. He crawled to the door of his igloo and peeked out. The storm had gotten much worse during the night. Snow was flying everywhere, and the wind was so strong it was hard to see more than a few feet. The aliens were huddled in their high-tech shelters, but Jake could see that they were having problems. The blue alien's shelter was shaking in the wind. Lights were flashing on and off, which probably meant the power system was struggling. The bug-like alien's shelter was making loud noises, like a machine that was working too hard. Jake crawled back inside his igloo and checked his supplies. He had some food in his backpack, but not much. He had enough for maybe 2 days if he was careful. He also had a metal cup that he could use to melt snow for drinking water. At first, he needed to solve a bigger problem. The igloo was warm, but it was not warm enough. Jake needed to find a way to make it even warmer if he was going to survive the next 2 days. He had an idea, but it was crazy. It was so crazy that even he was not sure it would work. Jake put on his jacket and crawled outside. The wind hit him like a punch in the face, and snow immediately started getting in his eyes and mouth. He could barely see, but he knew what he was looking for. All around the area where they had landed, there were pieces of ice. Some were small, like marbles. Others were as big as footballs. But Jake was looking for something special. He was looking for a piece of ice that was perfectly clear, with no bubbles or cracks. He found it about 20 feet from his igloo. It was a chunk of ice about the size of a dinner plate, and it was so clear he could see right through it. The wind and the strange atmosphere of this moon had shaped it into something that was almost perfectly round on one side. Jake picked up the ice and carried it back to his igloo. The aliens were watching him through their shelter windows, but he could not hear what they were saying over the wind. He crawled back inside and set the ice down carefully. Now came the hard part. Jake took out his knife and began to work on the ice, carving it very slowly and carefully. He was making a lens, just like the ones used in telescopes and cameras. But this lens was made of ice and it had to be perfect. The work was slow and difficult. Ice is hard to carve because it can crack or break if you are not careful. Jake had to warm the knife with his hands between cuts to keep it from sticking to the ice. His fingers were getting numb, but he kept working. After 2 hours, Jake had carved the ice into a shape that looked like a magnifying glass. It was not perfect, but it was close enough. He held it up to the light coming through the igloo wall and looked through it. Everything on the other side looked bigger and clearer, but Jake was not planning to use his ice lens to look at things. He was planning to use it to make fire. The storm outside was getting worse, but storms do not last forever. Jake knew that eventually the clouds would clear and the sun would come out. When that happened, he would be ready. He spent the rest of the morning preparing. He pulled threads from his clothes and rolled them into a small ball of tinder. He used his knife to shave tiny pieces of wood from the handle, mixing them with the threads. He also prepared some larger pieces of material that would catch fire easily once he got it started. Outside, Jake could hear the aliens talking to each other over their communication systems. Their translator devices were working, so he could understand most of what they were saying. "Power levels are dropping faster than expected," said Velcorum. "The heating system is using more energy than we planned." "Same problem here," replied Shiktar. "The cold is worse than our computers predicted. My biosystems are struggling to keep up." "We may need to call for early pickup," said another alien that Jake had not talked to before. "This test is more difficult than anyone expected." Jake shook his head. The aliens had amazing technology, but they were depending on it too much. When their machines started to fail, they did not know what to do. They had forgotten how to survive without their gadgets. Around noon, Jake noticed that the light inside his igloo was getting brighter. The storm was starting to clear, and sunshine was beginning to come through the snowblocks. Jake grabbed his ice lens and crawled to the door of his igloo. The wind had died down, and the snow had stopped falling. The sky was still cloudy, but Jake could see patches of blue appearing between the clouds. Most importantly, he could see the sun. Jake positioned his ice lens to catch the sunlight. The lens focused the light into a bright, hot point. He held his ball of tinder under the focused light and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, smoke began to rise from the tinder. Jake blew on it gently, giving the fire the oxygen it needed. The smoke got thicker, and then, suddenly, a small flame appeared. Jake quickly added more tinder, then larger pieces of material. Within minutes, he had a small fire burning inside his igloo. The smoke went up and out through the air hole he had cut in the roof. Just like his grandfather had taught him, the aliens saw the smoke coming from Jake's igloo and could not believe their eyes. Velcorum's voice came over the communication system, and Jake could hear the shock in the mechanical translation. "The human has created fire," Velcorum said. "How is this possible?" "There's no fuel on this moon. He used the frozen water," said Zithrel. "He shaped it into a focusing device and used the star's energy to create combustion." "Impossible," said Shiktar. "Our scientists said that fire could not be created in these conditions without advanced technology." Jake smiled as he fed his fire with more material. He had used the metal parts from his backpack buckles and some fabric from his clothes. The fire was small, but it was enough to warm his igloo and melt snow for drinking water. The temperature inside the igloo rose to a comfortable level. Jake took off his jacket and sat by his fire, feeling warmer than he had since arriving on this frozen moon. He filled his metal cup with snow and held it over the fire to melt. Outside, The aliens were having more problems. Jake could hear their machines making alarming sounds. Warning lights were flashing in their shelters. Their power systems were failing and they were running out of options. "We need to conserve energy," said Velcorum. "Reduce heating to minimum levels." "My biosystems are already at minimum," replied Shiktar. "I cannot reduce them further without risking system failure." Jake sipped his warm water and added more material to his fire. He had solved the biggest problem of surviving in the cold. He had warmth, he had light, and he had the ability to melt snow for drinking water. Most importantly, his fire would never run out of fuel as long as the sun was shining. As the day went on, Jake made improvements to his igloo. He carved small shelves into the walls to hold his supplies. He made the fire pit more efficient so that it would burn longer with less fuel. He even carved a small window that he could cover with a piece of clear ice. The aliens watched all of this with growing amazement. Their advanced technology was failing them. While this human was not just surviving, but actually making his situation better, when evening came, Jake was sitting comfortably by his fire, warm and well-fed. Outside, the temperature was dropping again, but inside his igloo it was cozy and bright. He had turned a deadly frozen wasteland into a comfortable home, using nothing but ice, fire, and the knowledge his grandfather had given him, the aliens. We're learning that sometimes the old ways were the best ways after all. The third day began with bad news for the aliens. Jake could hear their emergency alarms going off even from inside his warm igloo. He crawled to his door and looked outside to see what was happening. Velcorum's shelter was flashing red lights. The blue alien was outside, hitting the side of his building with one of his 4 arms. Even from a distance, Jake could see that Velcorum was moving slowly, like someone who was very cold. The bug-like alien Shiktar was having even worse problems. Parts of his biomechanical suit were smoking, and Jake could hear grinding noises coming from the machinery. The crystal being Zithral was flickering like a light bulb that was about to burn out. The energy bubble around it kept getting smaller and weaker. Jake felt sorry for them, but he also felt proud. His simple igloo was working perfectly while their expensive technology was breaking down. He added some more material to his fire and watched the flames dance in the warm air. The overseer's voice boomed across the test area. "All contestants, report your current status. This is a mandatory check-in." One by one, the aliens reported their problems. Velcorum spoke first, and his translator made his voice sound tired and worried. "Heating system at 30% power." He said, "Estimated time remaining before total failure, 8 hours. Shiktar's report was even worse. But biomechanical systems failing. External temperature regulation offline. Internal heat generation at critical levels." Zithral's voice sounded weak and far away. "Energy reserves at 15%. Emergency conservation mode activated. Requesting permission to abort test." Jake listened to report after report of failing equipment and dying power systems. The aliens had come to this test confident that their technology would save them. Now that same technology was letting them down when they needed it most. "Human Jake?" "Morrison," called the overseer. "Report your status." Jake crawled out of his igloo, and immediately all the aliens turned to look at him. Steam rose from his clothes where the warm air from inside met the cold air outside. His face was relaxed and healthy looking. He did not look like someone who had been fighting for survival for 3 days. "Doing great," Jake said cheerfully. "Got a warm place to sleep, hot food, clean drinking water, and enough fuel to keep my fire going for another week if I need to." The aliens stared at him in shock. The overseer's 4 eyes blinked one after another, like he could not believe what he was hearing. "Fuel?" the overseer asked. "There is no combustible material on this moon. What are you using for fuel?" Cake pointed to a neat pile of carved ice pieces that he had prepared near his igloo. "Don't need wood when you've got this. Every chunk of ice on this moon is potential fuel for my fire. The sun gives me all the energy I need to light it." Velcorum stumbled closer to Jake, moving like his legs were not working properly. "You are using frozen water as fuel? This is not possible according to our science." "Your science forgot something important," Jake said. Ice can be shaped into tools, and tools can help you make fire, and fire is all you really need to survive. Jake picked up one of his carved ice pieces and held it up so everyone could see. It was perfectly shaped into a lens, clear and smooth. When he held it up to catch the sunlight, the light focused into a bright, hot point. Furthermore, Jake continued, I've been making my shelter better every day. Added more insulation, improved the heating system, better airflow. My technology gets better with time instead of wearing out. Shiktar clicked and buzzed weakly. We have made a serious error in our calculations. We assumed that advanced technology was always superior to primitive methods. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Jake said. My grandfather always told me that the most advanced tool is the one that never breaks down. Zithral's colors had faded to almost nothing, but it managed to speak. On our world, we have forgotten the ancient knowledge. We depend too much on our machines, Jake nodded. Nothing wrong with machines, as long as you remember what to do when they stop working. The tree-like alien that Jake had seen before came closer. Its glowing leaves were dim now, and it moved very slowly. Human Jake, could you teach us your methods? Our power systems are failing, and we may not survive the remaining time. Jake looked around at all the aliens. They were proud beings from advanced civilizations, but now they were asking a human with primitive tools to help them survive. A few days ago, they had laughed at his simple equipment. Now they were desperate to learn from him? Sure, Jake said, but it's going to take time to teach you properly. And some of these techniques won't work with your body types. He walked over to Velcorum first. The blue alien was shivering, and his skin had turned a darker shade of blue from the cold. First thing you need to understand, Jake said, is that fighting the cold uses up energy. You want to work with the cold, not against it. Jake showed Velcorum how to build a simple windbreak using blocks of snow. It was not as advanced as an igloo, but it would help block the wind and reflect body heat back toward the alien. Stack the blocks like this, Jake explained, showing Velcorum how to fit them together. Each block supports the others. No power needed, no moving parts to break down. Velcorum tried to copy Jake's movements, but his forearms were clumsy with cold. Jake patiently showed him again, helping him place each block in the right position. Next, Jake went to help Shiktar. The bug-like alien's biomechanical systems were sparking and making awful noises. Jake could not fix the alien's technology, but he could teach him something else. You're using too much energy trying to stay warm, Jake told Shiktar. You need to conserve what you have left. Jake showed the alien how to dig a depression in the snow and line it with his own shed shell pieces to create insulation. Cold air sinks, Jake explained. If you get down below ground level, you'll be warmer. For Zithral, Jake had a different solution. The crystal being could not touch snow directly without losing energy, but Jake showed it how to use its own crystalline fragments to create a reflective shelter that would bounce its remaining energy back at itself. Think of it like a mirror, Jake said. Instead of letting your energy spread out in all directions, focus it back on yourself. As Jake worked with each alien, teaching them basic survival techniques, he realized something important. These beings were incredibly smart, but they had forgotten how to solve problems without their machines. They had become so dependent on technology that they had lost the ability to adapt and improvise. The overseer watched all of this with great interest. He made notes on a device that looked like a floating screen covered with alien symbols. Human. Jake, the overseer said, you are not just surviving this test. You are excelling at it. More importantly, you are helping others survive as well. Jake finished helping Zithral set up its reflective shelter and stood back to look at his work. The alien's improvised shelters were not as good as his igloo, but they were much better than nothing. More importantly, the aliens were learning to think differently about survival. That's what humans do, Jake said. We adapt, we learn. We help each other when things get tough. As the sun began to set on the third day, Jake's fire was still burning bright inside his igloo. The aliens were huddled in their improvised shelters, no longer completely dependent on their failing technology. They were cold and uncomfortable, but they were alive. Jake crawled back into his warm igloo and added more ice to his fire. Tomorrow would be the final day of the test, but he was not worried. He had proven that human ingenuity and ancient knowledge could outperform the most advanced alien technology outside. He could hear the aliens talking quietly among themselves. They were no longer dismissing human methods as primitive. They were beginning to understand that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most reliable ones. Jake smiled as he settled down for the night. His grandfather would have been proud. Jake woke up on the final morning feeling better than he had since arriving on the frozen moon. His fire had burned all night, keeping his igloo warm and comfortable. Outside, he could hear the wind still blowing, but inside his snow house, everything was peaceful and quiet. He crawled to his door and looked outside. The aliens were still alive, but just barely. Their improvised shelters had helped them survive the night, but they looked exhausted and cold. Their advanced technology lay scattered around their camps. Broken and useless. Vel. Karm was sitting in his snow windbreak, all four of his arms wrapped around his body for warmth. His blue skin had turned almost purple from the cold. Shiktar was barely moving, his biomechanical systems completely shut down. Only basic life support was still working. Zithral was the dimmest Jake had ever seen it. Flickering like a candle about to go out, Jake felt good about helping them survive, but he also felt sad seeing them suffer. These were proud beings from advanced civilizations, and now they were learning what it meant to be truly helpless. The Overseer's voice boomed across the test. Area 1 final time. The 72-hour survival test is now complete. All contestants will be evaluated based on their current condition and their demonstrated survival capabilities. Jake crawled out of his igloo and stood up straight. Steam rose from his warm clothes as they met the cold air. He looked healthy and strong, like someone who had just spent a relaxing weekend. Camping instead of fighting for survival on a deadly frozen moon, the Overseer approached each contestant to examine their condition. When he reached the aliens, his four eyes showed concern and surprise. They had survived, but just barely. Their technology had failed them when they needed it most. When the Overseer reached Jake, all four of his eyes blinked in amazement. Human Jake Morrison, you appear to be in excellent health. Please explain how this is possible. Jake gestured toward his igloo, which was still standing strong and beautiful. Smoke was still rising from the air hole in the roof, showing that his fire was still burning. I learned to work with this place instead of fighting against it. My grandfather taught me that nature isn't your enemy if you know how to use it. The Overseer walked around Jake's igloo, examining it closely. This structure was built entirely from local materials. Just snow, shaped with my knife, Jake said proudly. No power source, no moving parts, no computers, but it's kept me warm. And dry for 3 days? And your fire? How have you maintained combustion without fuel? Jake picked up one of his carved ice lenses and held it up to catch the sunlight. Even on this cloudy day, enough light came through to create a focused beam. Every piece of ice on this moon is fuel if you know how to use it. The sun provides all the energy I need. The Overseer made notes on his floating device. Then he turned to address all the contestants. This test was designed to determine which species could best handle emergency survival situations, the Overseer announced. We expected to see demonstrations of advanced technology and superior physical capabilities. The aliens nodded weakly, still struggling with the cold. Instead, the Overseer continued, we have witnessed something far more valuable. We have seen true adaptability. We have seen the ability to thrive using only what the environment provides. Jake smiled, thinking about his grandfather's stories of surviving in the Alaskan wilderness with nothing but a knife and the clothes on his back. Human Jake Morrison, the Overseer said formally, you have not merely survived this test. You have excelled beyond all expectations. More importantly, you have demonstrated the ability to help others survive as well. Velcorum struggled to his feet, moving slowly on legs that were stiff with cold. Overseer, the humans' methods appear primitive, but they are more effective than our most advanced systems. That is correct, the overseer replied. Advanced. Technology has many benefits, but it also has weaknesses. It can break down, it can run out of power, it can fail when you need it most, Shiktar clicked weakly. We have learned a valuable lesson. We became so dependent on our machines that we forgot how to survive without them. Zithral pulsed with faint colors. The human showed us that the most reliable technology is knowledge itself. Knowledge cannot break down or run out of power. Jake walked over to his fire pit and used his ice lens to start a new fire. The aliens watched in fascination as he created flames from frozen water and sunlight. Even after seeing it several times, they still found it amazing. My people have a saying, Jake said as he fed the fire with more material. Give someone a fish and they eat for a day. Teach someone to fish and they eat for life. The overseer nodded his massive head. This wisdom will be valuable for the Emergency Response Coalition. There will be situations where technology fails, where power runs out, where machines break. Down in those moments, we will need beings who can adapt and improvise. Jake stood up and brushed the snow off his hands. That's what humans do best. We've been surviving in harsh places for thousands of years, long before we had any fancy technology. We learned to use whatever nature gave us. The Galactic Survival Council has reached its decision, the overseer announced officially. Earth and humanity are granted full membership in the Emergency Response Coalition. Furthermore, humans will serve as survival consultants for extreme environment operations. The aliens looked at each other, then back at Jake. Despite their suffering, they seemed genuinely happy about the decision. Human Jake, said Velcorum, before we leave this place, would you be willing to teach us more of your survival methods? Jake looked around at the aliens who had once laughed at his primitive equipment. Now they were asking him to be their teacher. Sure, Jake said. But first, let me show you how to build a proper igloo. If you're going to learn human survival techniques, you might as well start with the best one. For the next few hours, Jake taught the aliens how to cut snow blocks and stack them properly. It was hard work for beings who were already exhausted, but they were eager to learn. Velcorum was clumsy at first with his 4 arms, but he eventually got the hang of it. Shiktar had trouble holding the blocks with his mechanical hands, but Jake showed him how to adapt the technique for his different body type. Zithral could not touch the snow directly, but Jake taught it how to use its energy to shape the blocks. From the distance, even the tree-like alien learned to use its branch-like arms to stack blocks in a stable pattern dot as they worked. Jake explained the principles behind each technique. It's not just about following instructions, he said. You have to understand why each step works. That way, you can adapt the method to different situations. When the rescue ships arrived to pick them up, the aliens had built their own practice. Igloos, they were not perfect, but they were functional. More importantly, the aliens had learned to think differently about survival. As Jake packed his simple backpack and prepared to leave, Velcorum approached him one final time. Human Jake, on behalf of all the contestants, I want to thank you. You could have let us suffer while you stayed comfortable in your shelter. Instead, you shared your knowledge freely. That's what my grandfather would have done, Jake replied. He always said that knowledge is only valuable if you use it to help others. The overseer made one final announcement as they boarded their ships. This test has taught us all an important lesson. The most advanced civilization is not the one with the most powerful technology. It is the one that can adapt and survive no matter what challenges it faces. As Jake's transport ship lifted off from the frozen moon, he looked down at the place where his igloo had stood. The structure was already being covered by new snow, but it had served its purpose. It had proven that human ingenuity and ancient wisdom could outperform the most advanced alien technology. Jake smiled and settled back in his seat. He was going home as Earth's first representative to the Emergency Response Coalition. More importantly, he was bringing with him new friends who had learned to respect human methods. His grandfather had always been right. The best technology was the kind that never broke down, and the best survival tool was a mind that could adapt to any situation. The frozen moon grew smaller behind them, but the lessons learned there would last forever.